5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Liftoff.
Put up your hands if you would prefer to have access to the highest performing investment categories in the world. Of course you would. And would you like it to be easy and simple? Of course you would. And would you like it to be efficient and low cost so it doesn't burn up your return? Of course you would. You don't want the dead weight loss of an inefficient old system to burn up your return. But that's what you're getting today. And everyone else in the world is getting that too.
FDIC has 140 or 150 billion in assets backing 18 trillion in deposits. It's a piece of dental floss underneath the high wire acting as a safety net. So we are nowhere near out of the banking crisis, not even by a long shot.
90% of US dollar bills are used in organized crime and tax evasion. And the reason why is because they're bearer bonds. There's no permanent record. The blockchain leaves the permanent record.
And most people who are sending money home from the Gulf are supporting on average 5 dependents. That means there are now 130 million people who are affected by the lack of financial service access for people who are poor.
If we could ETF a Bitcoin, imagine what we could do with all financial instruments. Everything is going to be ETF, and that means every stock, every bond.
Something else to note about these people: 98% of the low-income workers carry a smartphone, and they know perfectly well how to use that smartphone.
I will fire Gary Gensler and appoint a new SEC chairman.
What's going on, family and friends? Welcome back to another exciting interview. Today I have with me the one and only Eddie Cullen. Eddie is the visionary and CEO of Crescite, a transformative leader in blockchain technology and impact investing overseas. With a background in economics, international policy, and a track record of pioneering regulatory advancements, Eddie is driving global financial inclusion through innovative projects, including a $1 billion tokenization initiative in Africa. He's a former captain of Fordham University's D1 rugby team during college, and fast forward to today, not only is he still playing, but he also volunteers his time as a rugby coach for local universities. Now, with that being said, Eddie, how you doing today, sir?
I'm doing great. I'm glad to be here. Excited to talk about tokenization and all things blockchain.
So am I, sir. Appreciate you joining today. And it looks like you're wearing your rugby threads right now.
I am. So I actually just had practice with the University of Tennessee rugby. So getting back into some of my D1 coaching. So we had practice this morning from 7:30 to 9 a.m. I'm in Knoxville, Tennessee. So I'll get a chance to not only do tokenization research here in University Tennessee, I'll get to coach rugby and you know, it's not bad to hit people every once in a while. You know, that's what I used to say, although I wish my hobby was chess as I got older. But I really do enjoy the sport. You know, I think the teamwork and the camaraderie has taught me about building teams. And so I'll do that up until November. Hopefully we can win the SEC and get to nationals. But yeah, I do dual work on blockchain during the day. And then my hobby is coaching rugby. So
beating up people. I'm kidding.
used to. Now I'm old and tired and limping around, but it's it's a fun sport.
It happens. I've been sitting down in this chair all day, but I still have to stretch just because I'm getting old. And I was doing that right before this, but it's great on that topic of your collegiate days and still playing. At least you're still able to pull from those experiences and almost get inspired or pull inspiration. Because for me, I got my black belt in Taekwondo. Also like to beat up kids back in my youth, but no
so
longer.
I'm not messing with you.
Yeah, watch out. but ultimately, reminding myself, hey, if I was able to get that black belt, then I can do X, Y, and Z as well. So it's just kind of drawing from those experiences to inspire yourself into the next chapter or whatever that given circumstance is. But anyways, hey Eddie, enough about me. Let's talk about you, sir. What is a little, if you don't mind, for those in the audience to get a little bit more about who you are, your expertise, and what you're doing at Crescite.
Yeah, sure. So, Crescite's origin story is pretty interesting. So I actually been working with early stage startups for most of my career. And I guess I'll kind of tell you my origin journey because it leads into Crescite. And Crescite means to grow. It's in the book of Genesis. So if you actually see the Sistine Chapel, when God touches Adam's hand, brings man to life, that's what Crescite is. So that's what that word means. And the reason we picked that word, two reasons. One, the book of Genesis, but also in blockchain, you have the Genesis block. So there's kind of a play on both sides of the equation that, hey, look, we're going to look at faith-based impact development. And I'll get into what that means in a little bit to, we still want to be rooted in our technology, the practical applications of blockchain technology. And that Genesis block, we think is the beginning of a great new technology that I think is still in its infancy. But the origin story goes, my background quickly, Xavier High School, Fordham University, Georgetown. And I actually did a volunteer year right after college. So I lived on $85 a month working with the homeless, the poor, went down to the US-Mexico border, walked in the desert with no shoes on to see what it was like to be a migrant, and kind of did all these life experiences to get a different feel from where I grew up from, which was in New York City, in Manhattan. And I actually worked in early stage companies for about 10 years. So I helped accelerate 0 to 20, all different agnostic types of technologies. And I learned a lot in those days, just how to build a company, how to grow it, how to help folks get to that stage of being maybe a Series A backable company. And then, fast forward to kind of the COVID time, I did some crazy things. I worked for, I went into politics a little bit. I worked for President Biden, worked on the Biden campaign, more just, wanted to see what the public sector was like. And then fortunately, which I still think is crazy, I look back on it and I've actually been getting alerts because it's actually next month is the 4-year anniversary of when I announced I ran for mayor of New York City. And I ran for mayor of New York City. I only did it because of a knee-jerk reaction. I thought COVID things were being handled incorrectly. And I also, there was a mishandling of the September 11th event. And the September 11th event by de Blasio, Cuomo, they canceled it. They weren't sure what to do with it. They didn't know whether they wanted to continue with the festivities. And, I had a brother-in-law pass away on September 11th. I had about 75 friends and family. And I was about a mile away from when that happened. So for me, that was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back. And I said, the greatest thing about our country is that you really can step up if you want to try. So I did what any normal person would do, right? And I literally ran for mayor. I went and I recorded a video, filed the paperwork on my own. And it was that time during COVID where, I was walking through Times Square and I felt like I was an I Am Legend with Will Smith. Everything was boarded up. There was no one for, the eyes can see, you could, everything was empty. Announced on, I think, September 13th, if I remember correctly, or September 12th, and ran. And then I thought nothing of it. I said, okay, if I can make an impact in homelessness and migrants and bring some good nature to it. Fast forward to January, and I actually won one of the earliest debates. I beat Eric Adams, I beat the current mayor, and I won that debate. And the New York Times came out and said, he's one of the leading candidates. He could actually win. It was one of those moments where I was like, oh my God, what do I do now? Right? Like, okay, I have no experience with this. I haven't raised any money. I probably raised about $30,000 to $50,000. I was against war chests of 8 to 10 million. And then I got a harsh lesson in local politics. I had people coming with their knives out and, coming after me and really, I took that as a sign of respect. Like, okay, this guy could be a player in this situation. So mayor's race, it was clear that I wasn't going to win at some point in May. So I dropped out of the race, supported Eric Adams and just, said to myself, well, what's the next move? And then, I called my current co-founder, Carl Kill, great guy. He was Bloomberg's first general counsel. And it was right around the Beeple craze, the NFT Beeple craze. And I'd been in the public sector for about 2 to 3 years at that point, working on campaigns, really kind of going through the public sector motions and said, okay, what's next? And we said, well, what if we build a blockchain community for the Catholic Church or Christianity? And we started to, it started off as let's do NFTs for Fordham University with Vince Lombardi. Vince Lombardi, the famous NFL coach, won the first couple of Super Bowls. He's actually a Bronx native and went to Fordham University. And, we said, well, maybe we'll mint some NFTs and we'll sell and see if we can give back to Fordham. We signed a 5-year contract and that project spectacularly failed. We didn't sell any NFTs. We didn't really push the gamut there. But there was one thing that was very key that we learned, and this was through my customer development experience from all those years in startups, is that people actually wanted a token. They actually wanted something that was maybe a little bit more fungible, that could actually be, I wouldn't call it a currency, but something that could maybe tie people together that wasn't necessarily NFT. So from that key learning, we said to ourselves, all right, well, let's go the pathway of maybe building a token. Let's maybe go the pathway of writing a white paper. And that first year, which was 2021 to 2022, was really about interviews and white paper writing and really understanding what we wanted to accomplish with the token. And we ended up going down the pathway of finding XDC. So I went to R3 Court at first. Thought they were a good organization and really liked what they were doing, but I think they were really a little bit more too private on their permission sort of blockchain, and said, well, we want a private public state because the Catholic Church has private public natural collaboration. So we wanted that. And that's when I ran into XDC. We liked that it was ISO20022 compatible because of the financial messaging. I think they weren't new, but they weren't old. They were somewhere in the middle that, maybe we could actually build collaborative relationships with the founders and have some influence in a very positive way. I've learned to love, Atul and Ritesh over at XDC, the founders. I think they're great. And said, okay, let's launch our token. And we went on our token path, where we did launch our token generation event. Of course, in true Christian style, we launched it on Christmas of 2022, I believe. Yes, if I'm getting that correctly.
The complete opposite of the SEC dropping the lawsuit a few Christmases prior.
Yeah, exactly. It was really interesting. We actually launched our token pre-sale on the same day that FTX, Sam Bankman-Fried got arrested. So we had prepared to do a $2 million pre-sale. We were ready to go. We launched it in the morning, and then I think it was something like in the afternoon, he got busted. And I said, wow, this is not really a great situation right now for us.
Not for the entire market. Not at all.
Yeah, the entire market, the timing, everything was just not in our favor. But I've always said that I think the best companies can build in a bear market, and the best companies survive, and the best ideas sometimes come out of that. And, you can point back to a number of companies that built their ideas and concepts in bear markets or when things weren't great. So then not only did that happen with Sam Bankman-Fried, a couple months later, Silicon Valley Bank crashed. Mm-hmm. And I remember, funny enough, I was in Africa, and we'll get to that in a second, is Silicon Valley Bank crashed, and I was in Africa. I didn't have internet, so I couldn't really communicate to most folks. And I think people thought we were collapsing as well, because I was like in a village with like lions and no joke, tigers. I literally could not get to internet. And then finally I was able to the next day, and I wrote a long message about, where we're going with our organization, how we're doing it. And we've been a little bit unorthodox in our approach and how to build our token, how to actually build our projects. And so that's generally the origin story, a little bit of a, I think, long-winded answer, but kind of gives you an idea of where it came from. And like I said, I have a great co-founder in Carl Kill, who was Bloomberg's first general counsel, and actually built a lot of the electronic trading policy and compliance for the Bloomberg terminal in the 90s. So he's got just a history of understanding new technologies in finance, and we have differing skill sets. So I think those skill sets help us to where we are today with Crescite. And we've raised zero investment capital. We both own it 50-50. We've thrived, profitability. We've done what we've needed to do, and we haven't taken on excess capital. I think capital efficiency is lacking in blockchain and crypto. I think we see a lot of money thrown at marketing, a lot of pumping to try to get price up. And I think those sort of behaviors and mechanics is just something that we're not looking to do. We're really trying to build a sustainable, prosperous community.
Yeah. And I believe you're in stride to do that. And congratulations on the success you've achieved thus far. I want to talk about a few things about Crescite from its mission. You mentioned about, you touched upon the fundamentals of the leadership team, yourself included. You mentioned Carl. I believe Carl was he a former professor at Fordham for you? Yes. Or what I'd love to dive into is the relationships and the credentials or the pedigree of your of the leadership team for Crescite, because when I looked at the qualifications of both gentlemen on their LinkedIn, I was like, man, these are very plugged in and connected individuals. I'd love for you to underscore who these guys are, so it helps with the audience better understand, what type of arena you're playing in, Eddie.
Yeah, so I look,
and then let's follow. Excuse me, and then let's follow it up with the partnerships that you've also succeeded with starting with Securitize after you define the pedigree of your leadership team.
Yeah, absolutely. So look, I am, like I said, very blessed to have Carl. Carl is the co-founder that you want. He is, a seasoned attorney, and I'll try to give a brief background with him. He's actually with his family right now in Europe, which I think is hysterical. You'll find this funny. His last name is Kilb, and he's actually going to Kilb, Austria right now.
Oh, wow.
Everybody just to, kind of see the origin. And I think, you can almost make a Netflix special out of that.
Yeah.
But Carl, he's the founder of the Fordham Entrepreneurial Law Program. He's been in education for a while. We're coming up on knowing each other about 12 years. I think it's 11 now. And there he is right there. We're kind of more friends than anything else. And I think that's the best founders that come about. We never pressed working together. We just had a good relationship. We come from different generations, but we have very similar, like-minded morals and beliefs. His 3 kids went to St. Ignatius of Loyola Elementary School. That's where I went to elementary school.
Oh, wow.
So there's a lot of, interesting connections. And we were introduced when I was at Grand Central Tech, which was an accelerator in Midtown Manhattan, 2013, 2014 by, I think, the president of the Fordham Law Association or Real Estate Association, can't remember. And he said, "Oh, you should meet Carl." I met Carl, and we just became friends over time. It was never, "Hey, let's work on stuff together." That was never really the case. And then when the Beeple stuff came out, we just started having dialogue. And I said, well, why don't we just try to come up with something? I was kind of done with the public sector for now. And Carl has a really interesting story. I mean, he started his career off as a broadcaster, went to NYU Law School. He went to NYU and then Fordham Law School. And then he was a broadcaster. And when he was in the newsroom, a Bloomberg terminal came out, and he went over and he tried the Bloomberg terminal. And he's like, wow, this is something special and could really be something that could be, monumental in finance. So he actually took out the yellow pages, as he says, cold called Mike Bloomberg, got in front of him within 24 hours. They had a half-hour meeting scheduled. I think it ended up being a 2-hour meeting. And then he was able to really kind of push his career forward in a great way. So he just has that sort of, pick up the phone and ask type mentality.
Absolutely.
He was the first general counsel and he held that position for 15 plus years, building the compliance department.
It looks like 21 years according to LinkedIn.
Yeah. And then, he decided to kind of go out and do a number of different entrepreneurial ventures. And you can see there he has Kilb Enterprises. He's a mentor at Yale. He does a lot of great stuff with schools. And him and I came together. And one of the other things he's pioneering is sort of a blockchain DNS for enterprises. So actually, creating a .JPMorgan, a .Citibank, a .Securitize. So his pedigree is great because he can also, him and I think, have a good way of communicating with folks. So, you talked about Securitize. We've been lucky enough to really bring on some great partners. And, I laugh because I think we're competing against companies that have raised $200, $300, $400 million. We've raised $0. And we've sold about 2 million in tokens, probably about another 1 million in consulting fees. And we've made it sustainable just from him and I going out and doing direct sales, building this. Everything you see on there has kind of been us one step in front of the other, building it, brick by brick without, frivolous spending, or, going out. And you hear so many stories in the digital asset and crypto space. Not to say that it's wrong. I'm not judging anybody. But I think it's, we really took the approach of, okay, we want functional utility. I think people talk about utility for tokens, but sometimes they really just care about the price gains, right? And they don't actually care about actually. Not me. Yeah, right, exactly, right? And look, that's okay. That's all right. Some investors and some folks, want to get into that level, and we want to give serious returns to our investors. We want people to get in and say, okay, we're going to put in $50,000 on the token. We want to give them big returns. But the only way you do that, I think, is actually to have functional utility. So to bring up Securitize, we went through and I'll get into the Hekima University project in a second in Africa. We wanted to work with, the standard bearers of tokenization and the people who are, the torchbearers who are really kind of building in the right way. And I think Securitize, once we met with those guys, they went on a interesting journey too. They're great. We love them. Like, we think they're professional. We think they really are on top of their game, and they're honest about, hey, we had some trial and errors. We were building some tokenization products, but at times it was tough. We had to put one step forward and then two steps back. And, obviously the brands that they work with, whether it's Hamilton Lane, whether it's Blackrock, whether it's others, I think they've just done a good job in bringing a technology that most people, you probably get this all the time. I remember I was at Georgetown and like, oh, that's the crypto guy. It's like, no, it's a little bit more than that. And I think most of the space right now is taking complex concepts and breaking it down to understand how to actually use that technology. And I've always been more interested in smart contracts and efficiencies on finance, cross-border payments, not necessarily, buying Bitcoin and then looking at the price and trading. I actually don't do really any trading at all. And I only focus on real world asset application.
You know what? You're reminding me of a conversation that I just had today with a gentleman that I also have known since elementary school. We reconnected on LinkedIn because I had recently put out a Yahoo finance article that's caught an interest from a lot of people and also rekindled some longtime relationships. But where I'm getting at is this is a gentleman that is well versed in digital assets, has since taken a step away from the early 2017 days, because maybe, as you mentioned, it was that really hype and just nothing was. There was no, we're not experiencing a true utility bull run right now. It's all just speculation. And so, but what he mentioned was, I'm going to read it verbatim because it's just, crypto is still in its infancy stage. But I remember when crypto hit a heater in the summer of 2017, lots of people have since think it's sailed away. It simply hasn't. I just believe it's only gotten more savvy. And to your point, when you talk about tokenizing real world assets, cross-border payments, leveraging the infrastructure for an institutional basis. I mean, this is not a crypto bro phase anymore. This is the big boys wearing their big boy suits and dresses and coming to the table and making some big plays. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, and that's been great for us, right? We went on this token, and as you can imagine, when Sam Bankman-Fried was arrested, and I was getting calls from all sorts of investors and people and folks that kind of, were token holders ourselves. And they were like, hey, are you like this guy? Or are you following, in this guy's footsteps? Or, what is the technology? And it's really hard to break through some of those mainstream misunderstandings. Now, the funny part, though, is, and this is how I interpret it, the mainstream misunderstandings has actually helped us get ahead of people, I think. Because while people were worried about kind of that mainstream misunderstanding, we were able to just kind of accelerate our own knowledge. 1 year ago me, 2 years ago me, 3 years ago me, I probably couldn't speak as intellectually, competently about blockchain and tokenization in the way that I felt, was comfortable. And I'm still nowhere near an expert. And I don't think anyone's an expert in the space. I think what you know best just on what has happened. And I think our honesty and transparency, we do, self audits on our token, our spending, everything we've done has been audited, and we try to be transparent in that approach. And, I'll tell you the truth. We had a couple of times where people said, well, we want to buy another $1 million in tokens. We want to do this. And we didn't accept the capital because we didn't need it. Now, fast forward, I'll talk a little bit about our future in a little bit,
Please.
It's a little bit different now, but ours was about real utility. And I think one of the breaking moments was, I think, Larry Fink kind of coming out and talking about tokenization and blockchain and how it's the future. And I remember he had some dialogue and conversations and interviews where he said it's the future. And, we're going to start implementing some of these things. And then things started to turn. I think it was funny. I got a year of, oh, you're the crypto guy, to people call me up and be like, hey, how's your family? How's everything going? Hey, tell me more.
How's Bitcoin?
Exactly. Tell me what's that guy talking about? And we're seeing more of that. Goldman Sachs announced that they're going to have their first, I think, 3 tokenization projects by the end of the year. Citibank is making moves in digital assets.
Yes.
JPMorgan has Onyx. So you're kind of seeing
your partner Securitize has already tokenized more than $1 billion in assets.
And I'm proud of their work. Like I said, I cannot speak more highly of that team, the leadership, how they handle themselves, and how they've navigated a pretty complex environment. I think one thing that Carl and I have gotten really good at is navigating the regulatory landscape, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'll talk about some of our partners in a second, and maybe I'll talk about USA-UAE Alliance, given that we're policy focused, is when the Ripple judgment came out. It was a year ago, maybe now, somewhere around that time, that first kind of ruling where, and look, that precedent has evolved a little bit, where they said retail investors probably not going to be considered a security, but institutional investors probably will be, and that they gave different price points to different people within those institutional investments. 6 months earlier than that, we actually formulated the structure to our company exactly like that. But we filed for a Form D for our institutional offering of the token. And I said, looking at this with Carl and some folks around me, I said, I think what's going to happen is they're going to look at retail as not as securities, but they're going to look at institutional as securities. And you need to play both of that in order for your structure of your company to thrive. And that's exactly what happened. And when that judgment came out, I think it gave Carl and I the confidence to go, okay, we got to rely on what we think is going to happen because we were right. And because we were right, look, that's evolved now and it's different, and all the different judgments that have come out, it was more a confidence builder for us. And at that point, it was right around the time I formulated the USA-UAE Alliance with one of my Georgetown classmates, Michael Amatuli, which I'm even glad to share this on your show. We're actually coming back next year with, first time we're saying this, is we're going to do another event next year. We're actually raising a $500,000 round for it. We actually have capital for it. And we're going to bring back probably a 250-person conference in Washington, D.C., and a 250-person conference in Dubai next year as a build on what we did earlier this year. We did about a 50-person event at Georgetown University, and we invited Commissioner Hester Peirce, and we actually had TechCrunch's Jacqueline Melanik. We did a fireside chat for us three talking about regulation and where we're going with this. And in my brain, I said, wow, I went from a token launch with Sam Bankman-Fried and the market was crazy to, 6 months later, getting our structure to our company right with Ripple to 6 months later than that, I'm actually sitting in the student coffee shop with Commissioner Peirce having a 30-minute dialogue just talking about tokens, and then was on that TechCrunch podcast. And I said, wow, the evolution of trusting our gut and how we were going to handle this was important. And keep in mind, we didn't raise any investment. We didn't, we really did this on our own. So that was the Georgetown event. And then we did another event in Dubai, which was phenomenal. We had CEO from Vara, Matthew White. We had the CEO, Mohammed Ablushi from DIFC. We had Citibank. We had Binance. We had MasterCard. And, we had the founders of XDC. And we had in their space. And I said to myself, wow, we really just accomplished this very quickly. I think we did it January 26th and March 6th. We did those events. We took a little bit of a break from that, but we're coming back now to do two much larger events around policy, blockchain, and everything. And yeah, if you go to USA-UAE-Alliance.com, you'll actually see that sort of event. So
okay,
we're super, super excited, super excited to see where we're going with this. And I think we're really going to, see a policy forum, blockchain forum, where we actually do real tangible things. There were real outcomes that came out of that event. One of them is our relationship with Citi. I think you talked about partnerships. Mm-hmm. We had met, I think their vice president, senior government affairs representative who was there. Mike and I had a call with her, and we were working on our project in Kenya. And I said, we would love to maybe collaborate with you guys around banking, maybe working on other relationships with schools. And we started to formulate a relationship with Citi where now that's blossoming. And we actually have an international bank account for our Hekima project in Citi in Kenya. We have a US relationship with kind of endowments and universities. So, what you can see here with these partnerships and with my background on Carl, it's almost kind of an evolution of who we are as human beings. You can see the volunteer program that I did 10 years ago. You can see the schools that I worked with. You can see some of the little bit of finance and startups. It's almost kind of a melting pot of all these things that came about. And I do believe the best companies are the ones that derive from the founder themselves, and it just embodies who they are. I don't look at Crescite as work. I don't look at it as I'm building a company. I look at it as like I'm just doing something that I love to do. And I love working with schools. I love working with financial institutions. I like furthering the mission to help folks. And I guess that kind of brings us to Hekima. Hekima's story is really interesting. I've been in Jesuit schools my whole life, and we were actually sponsoring the Global Trade Review in Nairobi, Kenya. Wild story. I went to Belgium to a library, a little bit of a secret library, a little bit of public, 500 years old, and they hold 2,000 years worth of documents, from Saint Martyr court cases to Napoleon documents to, not kidding you, I felt like I was in Assassin's Creed. They had orbs on the library with water in them. So if there was a fire, you would throw the orb. And I felt like I was in a castle for 5 days. And through those conversations, there was a priest and another woman named Irene, who I really appreciated and look highly respect them. We were looking at doing NFTs for, artifacts within the library. And when you look back on it, that was probably wasn't the right approach. I think I was, I wouldn't say caught off in the NFT craze, but I think I was just still trying to figure out blockchain and tokenization. However, they made the introduction to Hekima, which was in Africa. They said, well, Ed, we know you like working with STEM-related research, and you're going to Nairobi. You should meet the team at Hekima. So Hekima University, the proposed Hekima University, is a 4-year university to be built in East Africa. It'd be the first 4-year Jesuit university in East Africa, serving 493 million people. I went there for the first time, and we had meetings about what they were trying to accomplish. You needed a few things to open the school. They already had, you needed 50 acres, a library, you needed classrooms, and you needed an office for the vice chancellor, which is the president of the school. If they accomplished those things, they would actually get a charter from the Kenyan Education Commission, and they would be recognized as a true university. So I said, okay, well, let me go visit Molo. I got in a van, went 6 hours to the middle of Kenya. It was not in a, it was in a rural area. That's what I'll say. And Nairobi, we made the drive and we went. And I said, wow, okay, they have the land, and the Jesuits have, a number of universities worldwide. And some of them everyone knows: Georgetown, Boston College, Gonzaga, if you watch basketball, Marquette. So they're all over the world, and this would be the first 4-year Jesuit university in East Africa. So I said, well, this is interesting. I think there needs to be a finance model that I don't think we can just do all philanthropy. You need to be sustainable to have a library. You need sustainability to do this. So that trip I brought up for the first time, and this was 14 months ago, tokenization and blockchain. And curiosity and the intrigue from the team at Hekima was, well, what's that? And, that was the first trip. Next trip I go on, and I made a few trips over there. Next trip, I'm starting to get presentations on, well, we could tokenize this natural resource in Uganda. We could tokenize this natural resource in Ethiopia. Well, what if we built a tokenization research facility? Then we started to really go into, well, what if we could just finance the entire school on chain and issue those shares and make it a little bit easier for cross-border investments? So if someone invested in the US, they can invest in the US, send the money over to Kenya, and there wouldn't be fees. Most money when it goes over to Africa, and also other countries, cross-border payments, sometimes there's 10% fees. So if you're sending $10 million, they're only getting 9. You send 100, they're only getting 90. And those fees get chopped up, constantly, and you're not really getting to your end goal with the project. So with Hekima, we established a relationship now with bank account in the US with Citi, bank account with Kenya. We're using smart contracts and flow with Securitize to onboard investment. And we actually signed a 20-year exclusive agreement to finance the school completely on chain with $1 billion by 2028.
Let's talk about that process a little bit. I'm going to read verbatim from an article that I read in regards to Hekima University that you guys are tokenizing. Excited to leverage software with JPMorgan as a partner into our proposed Hekima University project with the tokenization launch on Securitize. What was the motivating factor for you to select these two entities as strategic partners for this initiative?
So JPMorgan is more, we're using software technology to manage cap tables, shareholders. One thing that I've been really intrigued about in terms of blockchain is the non-fungible aspects of identity and KYC. That's something that's been really intriguing to me. So I'll give you an example. When we were with Commissioner Peirce at TechCrunch, we were talking about how, I know we have .eth, or we have kind of, unstoppable domains. Unstoppable domains, though, I think built on Polygon, kind of tough to be a little bit more built towards financial institutions. We said, why don't we come up with a .accredited? The SEC knows exactly who's accredited, and
Wow.
It's mutable, it's done. And we actually have that technology. We have a patent pending, been working on it for a few years. We're going to be launching that in our site in September. So JPMorgan is more of a software relationship. We kind of work with them, not blockchain related. It's more of management of cap tables, management of the accredited investors, management of those folks. Our eventual goal is to issue perhaps a JPMorgan or a Citibank, or that would hopefully be our end goal, because then that enables those banks to make transactions. Now imagine within our Crescite portal, and we launched a first version of it on cresciteinnovation.com. It's a very vanilla version of what's to come. Is our end goal is what if there's 250,000 employees at JPMorgan, and it says .JPMorgan, and John.JPMorgan comes in, makes an investment, and we know immutable wise, who is actually making those investments. We don't have to worry about KYC or being anonymous. And I'm sure you've dealt with this. How many times do you get a 30 to 40 character, digital asset address or crypto address, and you go, well, I hope this gets to them. I don't know, let's hope. And I've run into that before, where we haven't done it, but horror stories of people sending to wrong addresses, or getting locked out of their wallets, or forgetting their code of 6,000 words they got to remember, right? So,
no, to your point, it's for this to be, for blockchain technology and these new payment rails to become fully mass adopted, is to where the user has no idea that they're interacting with these technologies, and I think we're closer than people think. And let's backpedal on that comment that you made about you having a patent pending on the accreditation ID verification. Why this rings a bell for me is my former employer, Link2, has an investment platform that allows accredited investors worldwide to invest into these hard to reach private equity opportunities, these tech enabled private companies like Ripple Labs, Circle, who's one of your strategic partners as well. Is that something that you foresee a market participant like Link2 adopting if you are the owner of that patent?
Yes. So we have two patents pending right now. I'll talk about both of them. One of them is the identity domain. In the identity domain, though, the difference between what we've done and others is identity domain that is attached to your mobile phone number, or having that attached to, if you're familiar, you ever get an Amber Alert on your phone? So you get an Amber Alert, and some guy is with his car and you can't go outside, like go chase him. That's what comes up on the Amber Alert. Most people don't know this, but the Amber Alert actually operates on a system that is not online. It's on a channel that is run by mobile operators that is pretty much impenetrable. You can't hack it. You can't get through to it. So our patent is actually based on attaching identity to your mobile phone number and actually using parts of that channel to make that DNS almost, not hackable. You can't do it. And that was one of the first things that we did 3 years ago. That was my first thought. I said, for this to move forward, we're going to need better KYC. We're going to need better identity of folks, because I wasn't thinking about retail. I think retail is great. I think trading retail, I think people should be free to trade. And I think all those things are phenomenal. For this space to really have the impact that I think it can have, we got to be able to unlock the Blackstones of the world, the Blackrocks of the world, the JPMorgans, the Citi. And functionally, they just have a lot of regulations and KYC mechanisms. And they should. If you're moving $10 to $20 million or $1 billion or 500 million, there should be some novel, understanding that we need to do this KYC. So that's
it's not a hard ask.
Right, exactly. And look, I get it. I get people who are like, well, we built the system for freedom and decentralization and all this. I get it. Like, I understand where that's coming from. So that was our first patent. The other one is actually something that we got a few months ago. It's what we're calling the proof of international trade and the proof of global settlement. So a consensus mechanism to enable global financial system across borders. Not going to be a popular response, but I actually don't think the Ripple technology is completely right. I don't think the way it's built, and I don't think the way the company has been capitalized from token sales and all of that, I'm not sure if they're the Facebook or the Friendster of cross-border transactions yet. And that's kind of just where my brain is at. I'm not bashing them. I'm looking at this very objectively. And I think for us to really see cross-border payments get to where it needs to be, I think we need to have something that is seamlessly integrated into existing systems. So, which is why we were so attracted to ISO20022 with XDC, because if you think about it, if you build a security token and it can already exist and kind of go through it, I think the notion that Swift is going to go away, I think is ridiculous. I think hearing that, oh, well, it's going to replace Swift, it's just not happening, right? Like, there's just not a realistic interpretation of how finance is done in this world. Swift has been around for years. They've upgraded ISO 20022, even though it's taken forever for it to come out. You need to work with existing systems that are there. And we feel like stable coins are going to be a fantastic, I think, utility across the world. We're looking at building a Kenyan stable coin. We went through 8 months of compliance with Circle to be able to use their APIs, build on-ramp, off-ramps for our token. And we're in constant dialogue with them to kind of bring about how we can work with them. So, to the point of, I think we talked about this last time, is I was skeptical in USDT. I would sit in rooms and people would go, yeah, Russian oligarchs are buying USDT, and then USDT is using those funds to purchase US treasuries. Now, US treasuries are a security, a government security. When you purchase them, they have to know who you are, right? So sure, and then look, you have the struggle, the battle of, well, okay, we don't want Russian oligarchs to have, government securities, but we also want the dollar to have its dominance like it has in global trade for the last, whatever years it's been. So there's kind of a struggle there, but I made conscious decisions not to tie our token to USD probably in early March after the alliance. As I would sit in rooms, and it wasn't coming from me, people were shorting USDT and they were like proud of it. And I was like, okay, I know everyone talks about the USDT, oh, it's going to crash, all this. So I made a conscious decision not to tie our token to that anymore. Not because I don't believe in the technology or the team, and that has nothing to do with it. Objectively, the unknowns are too risky for us. Now, USDC, I think the knowns are okay for us. They do compliance. Sometimes it's over the top. Like, I remember I was in Zambia for a meeting and I got a message from them saying, hey, did you use a VPN in Zambia? I'm like, no, I'm actually in Zambia. And they were like, okay. Right. So they actually follow up, and I really appreciate that. And I think Jeremy Allaire is an incredible CEO. I think he's one of the things I liked about Jeremy is when the Silicon Valley Bank crashed, they had a lot of their assets there. He moved it before things really happened. And when I saw that, got a chance to meet for him for only a couple of minutes at the Circle Converge conference. And I said, okay, he's a good leader. He's gonna, I think, do what's right. And I think you have to do that when you start talking about the US dollar and government-backed securities. I am not a believer of the dollar is going to go away. I think that is nonsense, right? I think the dollar is too tied to our global trade system and global reserves. And I studied international trade at Georgetown. And the reason I did that is because I wanted to find out like what I didn't know. And I think global trade is such a complicated sort of, between tariffs and non-market movers that for us, compliance is always going to be top of mind. It's the number one thing. We figured if we were compliant, capital efficient, and transparent, and we built genuine relationships, naturally we would fall into working with organizations that would respect that. And that's what's happened. We've been able to work with Securitize, JPMorgan's software. We've been able to work with Citibank. We've been able to work with universities. We have a great big MOU with University of Notre Dame. We've had Commissioner Hester Peirce. We've had CEO Matthew Vara. And I'm not one of these guys that, I used to be impatient in my early days in terms of, okay, we got to do everything tomorrow. Very patient in how watching these things develop. So those are kind of our two patents, and then everything kind of plays into it. Identity and verification, proof of international settlement. We really want to be the platform that is helping enable project finance internationally. But when Ray sends money to Africa, it's going to Africa, and it's actually going there because it's going to Citibank. And when you send $1, 10 cents of it isn't going to some random person getting fees. It's all of it's going there. So that's, we look forward to I think 2025 is going to be a fantastic year. I think once we get past the election year, we start talking about Trump, we start talking about Kamala Harris. I think both of them are going to be pro crypto, to be honest. I think, it's really funny. I heard him, Trump say about firing Gary Gensler. That's not even possible. That's not like a regulatory thing. He can't just go in and fire him. It'd be more that likely that he would resign. But he has no authority to actually fire him, right? But then Kamala comes from California, and trying to be politically unbiased here, she has dealt with Silicon Valley. She has dealt with technology companies. So I think you're going to get probed on both sides, which I think is a good thing. And I think 2025 is going to be a breakout year for the institution. And we hope to be right in the middle of that. And we're proud that we're in conversations with some of the biggest players, yet we have probably raised, or no, we haven't raised any money. We probably have 0.2%, 0.3% of the capital that some of these other companies have raised. And we take that with a grain of salt. We try to be humble about it in terms of, we're here in these dialogues, but we don't know everything, and we want to work through it with you. And that's why I love companies like Securitize. Securitize is like, you know what? We don't know everything, but we're doing the best we can, and we're going to work with you on it to get there. And that's what we found with some of these bigger players, that I think the people who don't work with the bigger players are kind of, they think they know everything, and none of us know anything. Know everything. And I said that about Ripple when they were getting slammed by the SEC and all of this. They weren't the only companies that got slammed by the SEC. And I always said this, because when you play a baseball game, you don't go up and argue with the umpire before the game starts. And that bravado is something that we don't want. Like, we don't want to be the guy that goes and fights. We want to go and collaborate, because collaborative approaches, I think you're going to get to your end goal if you don't do it in a combative way.
Interesting. I 100% agree. It's easier to get what you want playing with sugar rather than with knives. But anyways, we've talked about a lot of things today, Eddie, and I want to continue this conversation, but we're getting close to winding things down as we've got a hard stop, both of us. We're both busy changing the world in our own regards here. Now, before I do let you go, you've brought up Circle a couple times. One thing that we did touch on last time we spoke was you mentioned a potential occurrence of Circle maybe getting acquired by a third-party entity, maybe a financial institution like Bank of America. Do you think that's accurate? They recently filed their confidential S1 in January, though. So, and they had also done that, I think, in 2021 or 2022 as well. So, what are your thoughts? Do you think it's there's an acquisition or an IPO in the forward-looking path for Circle?
It's a good question. Obviously they need to have an exit of some sort, right, to get returns to their investors. I think Jeremy Allaire is one of the brightest CEOs that we have in blockchain. And in technology in general.
Absolutely.
I think he's going to make the right decision for Circle moving forward. I think he's going to, keep his ear to the ground. I'm more of a proponent of, I think stablecoin regulation will come. I think it's on its way. And remember, we're always reactive on that. We're reactive on if something goes down, we make a move to change it, right? If you think of 9/11 and the Homeland Security Act, or you think about the mortgage crisis, that was Dodd-Frank, I think, came right after that. So we were reactive. And I think something similar like that could happen, right? Do I think USDT could completely go away? It's possible, but they could stay around. I think it depends on how collaborative they are with people in terms of, I think they had a $30 billion Russian oligarch that was all over the news, months ago, right? Where USDC, who knows? There could be a situation like LinkedIn where share prices went down right when they filed an IPO, and Satya Nadella called up, the CEO, I forget his name, Jeff, I forget his last name, and called the leadership, Reid Hoffman, and said, "I'll buy you right now." Bought them out, right?
Wow.
And, brought them out on a phone call. Satya Nadella made his move. So I think Circle is a premier acquisition target. Now, whether it's Bank of America or JPMorgan or another organization, they got it right in terms of a compliance perspective. And if you're building a stable coin, that's attractive for a bigger bank. So I think Jeremy, as a good leader, he's going to make his own right decisions. I think he'll, if he goes IPO, great, but don't ever rule out that he gets a phone call from, like a Brian Moynihan at Bank of America, and he's like, look, I'll buy you for X dollars per share, and you become part of us. Or same thing with Jamie Dimon and vice versa. So I think the future in general is just bright for Circle. I am appreciative of them. And I don't think people like it as much because they are heavily compliant, and we took 8 months to go through. So again, can't speak highly enough for them as well. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate that because full transparency, I'm an investor in Circle thanks to my former employer, Link2, and their technology-enabled platform, them, Ripple, and a few others. Maybe one day we'll see Crescite on that platform as well. That would be pretty interesting. But Eddie, there's a lot that we still didn't talk about as far as your USA-UAE alliance. Do you mind if I play that video?
Crescite's compliance-first approach has put us at the forefront of leadership in the United States, pioneering digital assets. We're excited that we hosted Commissioner Peirce and Jacqueline Melnick here at Georgetown University discussing the future of digital assets in the United States, ranging from a token safe harbor proposal 3.0 to decentralized identities to pioneer how we look at KYC in the United States.
Today we hosted SEC Commissioner Hester Peirce to discuss the future of digital assets in the United States. We look forward to welcoming you to our March 6th event in Dubai, where we discuss regulatory and innovation of the UAE and a collaboration between the US and the UAE.
The USA is positioned to be a leader in digital assets. We can pioneer digital assets. And Crescite's compliance-first approach has allowed us to bridge relationships with commissioners like Hester Peirce, to CEOs in Dubai, to public-private partnerships that have not been built before. So as a groundbreaking collaboration, we're bringing together the United States and we're bringing together the United Arab Emirates.
So really excited about the USA-UAE alliance and the impact that that's going to have on global trade. I think that the efficiencies that could be created between the US and the UAE and aligning those incentives and utilizing blockchain to facilitate that could really bring exponential growth to both their economy and ours. And really excited to be part of the team with Eddie and Crescite. They're helping facilitate that and the future of what they're building.
Join us on March 6th for our event in Dubai as a follow-up to today's event with Commissioner Peirce and TechCrunch.
And look, would love to have you even participate. We're going to hold it in Washington, D.C. again.
Okay.
So we're looking at venues, and we're looking now in Dubai. We're raising $500,000. We have about a fifth of it committed already. So we're kind of going through the motions to make it a little bit more standard. And, talking about Crescite over the next year, our big thing is we are launching a huge private sale in September. So we raised $2 million before. We're going to look to raise probably about 18 in September. And then we're going to really build out our on-ramp, off-ramp. We're going to release our identity verification in September. And we're also in our subnet creation. So we're now building our node staking, which is a huge part of our model and almost 60% of our supply of our tokens. And we're actually building our staking with an institutional partner that I won't reveal yet. But we're not going to just offer it with Crescite. It'll be Crescite and from what it looks like, a major bank. So it won't be...
Reveal it, Eddie. Reveal it with 1 minute left.
And, look, tokenizing more real-world assets. I'm hopeful that we can continue to build on Securitize. I don't want to say how many projects we'll build on there and how many not, because we're still going through some trial and error because we're testing. But my hope is that we can get to 50 real-world asset projects by the end of the year. So that's really what we're looking at and what we're looking to accomplish over the next 12 months.
Excellent. Well, Eddie, looking forward to having you back much sooner rather than later. Hopefully, we'll get you back before you guys close up the raise potentially. I'd like to bring more awareness to your ecosystem and allow others to participate and get in the trenches alongside you. What's the best pathway for those to reach you in the audience?
Well, I'd say Eddie at cresciteinnovation.com. I'm pretty free-flowing in terms of communication. We'll have an upgraded white paper opinion, all of our upgraded tokenomics, partnerships, everything kind of released right around Labor Day. And that'll be our next phase of our company. We look at our company has gone through its first 2 phases, we like to say. We're entering phase 3. And now we think we're going to see a significant upward trajectory because we now have institutional partners, and we didn't have that before. So
excellent. Well, Eddie, it's been a pleasure, sir. I'd love to keep this conversation going. If you don't mind, I'm going to move you to off the stage. I'm going to come back to you in just a second. I want to close this room down, but I appreciate you, sir. Give me 1 minute. Thank you very much.
Yep.
Awesome. Thank you everyone for tuning in today. If you thought today's content was impactful, please make sure to smash the like, comment, and subscribe button, as it really helps me lift this channel off the ground. If you have any questions for myself or Eddie, feel free to leave those questions in the comment section below, and I'll be back with another live stream next Thursday, August 22nd at 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. I'll be hopping into a live stream with Matt Rosendin, founder of Capsign. Looking forward to see you all back next week. Hope you have a great rest of your day and week. Love you mucho.